and welcome to another edition of This Week in Cleantech, a roundup of the week's biggest stories you need to know in climate and clean energy in 15 minutes or less. Today is Friday, August 4th, 2023. I'm Renewable Energy World Senior Content Director John Engel, joined again by Tigercomm President and Cleantech PR veteran Mike Casey. Mike, it's great to see you.
Mr. Engel, we're getting into the rhythm of doing this thing, but I'm finding that it's actually hard to go through 5 stories in 15 minutes. That's my conclusion from the first 2 episodes.
And it's also hard to say the correct date. So my only goal going into this episode was to properly identify the day of the week. And I think that I've done that. Can we get a check on that? August 4th, correct? Yeah. All right.
I think you've set a low bar for us, John, and I appreciate it because I think we'll both be able to clear that one.
Yeah, good. All right, Mike, you want to get us started?
Yeah, you bet. And just want to say to our listeners and our viewers, hey, we want you to be part of the show. So please give us feedback on how this is working for you, format, etc. And make sure that you send us suggestions on the stories that you want to see us cover. These have to be published stories. These aren't news releases, but these are stories that have run in mainstream media you think make the cut for the top 5 of the week. So we're going to go to our first one. That is number 1. We've got another Fred Dvorak story in the Wall Street Journal. The U.S. clean energy company that hit the subsidiaries jackpot. This story reports that the big U.S. solar equipment maker First Solar expects to receive as much as $710 million this year, nearly 90% of forecasted operating profits from IRA subsidies. John, what do you think of this story?
Yeah, it probably comes as no surprise that the company that was maybe most vocal for the Inflation Reduction Act and the Solar Energy Manufacturing for America Act on the solar side is best positioned to cash in on the incentives within the legislation. And that's in large part due to the supply chain intricacies of thin film manufacturing not requiring the Chinese and Southeast Asian inputs that crystalline manufacturing does. But I think it's obvious that First Solar is extending that gap between them and everyone else when it comes to domestic manufacturing and making sure they're compliant with the IRA. So, I think they've got a great story to tell.
I think it remains to be seen if China's dominance in solar manufacturing can be lowered, but we're all in, at least in our shop, on American made, because making panels in the U.S. and the EU, cleaner economies, produces way less of a carbon pollution footprint than it does in making them in coal-powered factories here in China. John, I'm going to give you a 1-question quiz. To make a 40-pound panel in Western China, how much coal needs to be burned? Just take a guess.
I don't know, Mike. A lot of coal?
520 pounds per 40-pound panel. It's a lot. So I do worry, I got to say, this story is going to be used by the fossil fuel lobby to try to turn First Solar into another cylinder. It is not, but I do think there's a chance that that'll get weaponized against them. So that remains to be seen. But John, what's our second story?
Kat Clifford from CNBC wrote about Vogtle Unit 3 nuclear reactor coming online after long delays and cost overruns. So the first new 1,100 megawatt nuclear reactor built from scratch in the U.S. entered commercial operation on July 31st. So that was Monday. Vogtle Unit 3 is now online after 7 years of delays and at a cost of nearly $35 billion. I think that was double the initial estimates. Mike, what do you think?
I think this is further proof that a broken clock is right twice a day. Despite the nuclear bros that tend to swarm LinkedIn at the very mention of carbon pollution, I think the story shows that nuclear remains a government-funded money pit. The commencement of this plant's operations show nuclear's continued problems, not a reason to enable more of it. How about you, John?
Well, I don't think I'm ready to cast aside nuclear altogether, but I do think this is one of those stories where it's difficult to tell if it's a victory or a cautionary tale. We need as much firm, clean power on the grid as we can get, but we clearly still don't know how to do that efficiently and cost effectively at scale with nuclear. Mike, what's our third story?
I really like this one. Adele Peters and Fast Company has one. MIT engineers developed a new type of concrete that can store energy. They've mixed what they call carbon black, a conductive black powder into concrete, producing a network of carbon wires that act like a supercapacitor that can hold electric charges. What do you think of that, John?
Yeah, I think this is going to be one of those where you get really excited about climate and clean tech, and I'm more of the clean energy infrastructure guy. So I think that this research is certainly important, and we need solutions like this maybe eventually, but we're a far cry away from charging electric vehicles as they drive down the road. And that mention alone is likely to get the general public excited, but you're going to get some eye rolls from people in the industry who say we have a lot of near-term problems that need solutions today. Mike, what was your thoughts on that piece overall?
I think that Brian, our producer, needs to put Debbie Downer under your caption on this episode. That's Realist. What I think. But Realist. I love this story because it's the latest example of people doing really smart, innovative things in this space. And I love this quote. If used in place of regular concrete, this could potentially act as an energy for rooftop solar panels or even for EVs to charge as they drive, end quote. And John, in all seriousness, I'm with you that some of these innovations are going to succeed. Some of them will not, even though some of those that fail should succeed. But I think this is the sort of innovation we need to keep driving the clean energy transition forward. It's definitely a long shot, but the energy transition really needs a cheap, scalable storage medium that can fit with existing infrastructure. John, what's our fourth story?
Yeah, really important one from the USA Today. Deep sea mining could help fuel renewable energy. Here's why it's been put on hold. So this story details the arguments in the debate about mining the seafloor for critical minerals, about those challenges of getting international agreements in place for tearing up the seabed, all with those pros and cons. Why do you think this one made the cut, Mike?
Well, I'm a fan of Beth Weiss, and I think she does some great reporting here on the conundrum of how we're going to solve a global sustainability problem through industrial means. And there's going to be a mess along the way, and I think we've got to select the least messy, most cost-effective route to get to a livable planet. Now, that said, in this country, we tend to go fast and figure out the long-term consequences later. All you have to do is look at the damage we've inflicted already on the ocean through this massive amount of plastic pollution. And I think we need to be confident that tearing up the seabed to get at minerals that we need is the most cost-effective and least messy way to do it, rather than expedient for the mining industry. I think it's clear that a functioning, healthy ocean is something that once lost will be nearly impossible to get back. And I think that's really the hinge question. So I love the story for setting up the issue. I think it's far from resolved.
Totally agree. Sourcing critical minerals is dicey on sea or land, and I don't think we have the perfect equation yet for either. It's messy, as you put it, but we also have major concerns about links to human rights abuses and the carbon intensity of how we are mining and collecting these minerals, and it's striking that balance of how do we limit the damage we're doing today while not going too slow in addressing climate change? And I don't think anyone really has that answer yet, but it's important that we don't ignore this one and don't try to only move forward with the moral obligation of fighting climate change at our backs. We do need to talk about this tough stuff too, or it's going to come to bite us down the road. Mike, how about the last story?
Yeah, so number 5 is an interesting piece by two Reuters reporters, Valerie Volcovici and Nicola Groom. U.S. moves to link more wind and solar projects to the electric grid. And this is one where the U.S. regulators are approving moves to connect new power sources to the grid faster and rationalize the connection queue. John, what did you think of this piece?
I think that this has the potential of being one of the biggest stories in our space for the entire year. I mean, everyone from the developer community, asset owners, utilities, grid operators, everyone has been waiting for this ruling to come out of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission since this process started, I think, last summer, almost a year ago. And it addresses a clear bottleneck and one of the biggest hindrances to the energy transition, that's interconnection and working your way through the queue. So it couldn't have come at a better time, and really happy to talk about this with Valerie.
Interconnection is one of the big barriers to clean energy transition, and there's a lot of what I'll call project spam that clogs the interconnection queues. Mm-hmm. And a buddy of mine, Rob Gramlich, was quoted in this story. He notes that ordering the queue based on readiness is good, but it doesn't get at the underlying transmission constraints. Princeton's Jesse Jenkins, who runs the Zero Lab, their estimates will miss 80% of the carbon pollution reduction benefits from the IRA if we don't increase the rate of building transmission lines. So I think all of that's true. And Confucius said, better to light one candle than to curse the darkness. And I think that the clean energy transition is going to be a process of lighting a lot of candles to get to fully illuminate the energy room here. And I think that's why you're right. This is an important development. And Valerie has agreed to join us to talk about the story. So, Valerie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right. So, I'd like to know what drew you to this piece, and what do you think the big takeaways should be for people working in clean tech who read it?
Sure. Well, as you've been watching, this is something that's been under development for a year. And in thinking about, different stories about, how the Inflation Reduction Act is being implemented and what are some of the barriers. I mean, this is one that came up all the time, this kind of enormous backlog of renewable energy projects that are waiting to connect to the grid. So, we knew that FERC was working on something. They had said they were aiming for this summer, and then they actually delivered this summer. So I think that in itself seemed to be an accomplishment, that they said they were going to do it by this summer, and they've, kind of voted unanimously to do it. And I think it sounds like it's a welcome first step. But, as you pointed to, Rob Ramlish said, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and some of the heavier lifts are still underway at FERC.
So, Valerie, some of the top line things that I take away from your piece and just the ruling from FERC is first ready, first served was something we knew was probably coming. The consistency piece of having a nationwide framework for an interconnection, I think, is huge for developers navigating all of these regulatory environments. Cluster studies will be huge. And then these increased obligations financially for both utility and developer to stay honest with the process, eliminate speculative projects and eliminate the drawing out of the queue. But I want to drill down into that good first step point that I've heard. All the press releases I got with statements from the advocacy organizations and trade groups who say, great first step, but more needs to be done. Did you get a good idea for what they're looking for and what that more needs to be in that next step?
Right. Well, it sounds like the next step is the stuff that Willie Phillips said FERC is working on right now, just looking at the other transmission reforms, looking at cost allocation. I think that, I think some of the fees and that kind of predictability can help weed out some of the speculative plays, but, it's unclear whether, what improvements have been done to the actual interconnection studies, whether they're still going to be kind of overly burdensome, what the developers will still need to do. So I think there's still uncertainty about how this will play out, but they tackled some of the reforms that some of the regional operators have started to already play with. So I think that's why it was a good first step, but they've got their work cut out for them.
Valerie, do you, Nicola, share John's sense of the importance of this development? I mean, I do as well, but I wanted to know if you all cover a lot of policy developments. It's kind of what you do for a living. So where would you put this on the scale of importance?
I think it's quite high on the scale of importance. We had recently John Podesta come and talk to some reporters at Reuters about IRA implementation, and one thing that he really homed in on was the fact that there needs to be these steps taken to address the backlog and to kind of reform the transmission system. So we know that the Biden administration sees this as a top priority, and it's clear from people doing projects out there, they've got the opportunity, but what is the overall benefit of having the IRA investment if they can't actually get those megawatts on the grid? So I think it's huge, and I think it also keeps the pressure on FERC. People are now really paying attention to this interconnection issue, and they're going to be kind of putting the pressure on FERC to deliver the other pieces of the puzzle.
John, we are about out of time. I want to give a shout out to our terrific producer, Brian Mendez, and to Alex Peterson, Claire Quirin, and Phoebe Lees for helping us identify this week's top stories.
Yeah, and thanks to Valerie Volcovici from Reuters for joining us for this episode of This Week in Cleantech. Please remember to subscribe, give us feedback, and share your story suggestions with us each week. And you can also read all of those stories, including Valerie's, that we discussed this week by clicking the links in the episode description. Make sure you check out Monday's episode of the Fact of This podcast. We'll be talking about interconnection, but at the distributed level in the Northeast. You won't want to miss that one. Mike, it was great doing this. I think this was a good one.
It was really good. John, I'm going to wish you a good weekend, and I'll see you next week.
All right. We'll see you next week.